The decline of the classic Mayan cities of the rainforests left the Mayan people in a state of flux. A new life and a rebirth of their culture was on the horizon, but new lands meant new priorities, and the Mayans had to adapt to the unusual way of life in this new landscape. The unity of the classic Mayans had now become a thing of the past, as new city-states vied for power, creating temporary unions and confederations of local rulers. The new city-states of the post-classic Mayans relied on trade networks to prosper, but the fundamental spiritual and cultural identity of the Mayans was still able to be recognized as the centuries rolled by until the fateful arrival of the Spanish gave the Mayan culture its ultimate challenge. The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler.
This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Volume 4, The Medieval World. Episode 88, Postclassic Maya. During our volume of episodes about the classical world, we discussed the classic Mayans, and we discussed the settlements of Calakmul, Copan, Palenque, and Tikal. These settlements existed in the lowlands of Mesoamerica, which are centred on, but not restricted to, the lands of the modern state of Guatemala. These once thriving settlements were abandoned sometime after the 7th century, and the Mayan culture migrated northwards into the Yucatan Peninsula. It is possible that prolonged droughts in the south led to a migration of peoples northwards. It certainly seems to have led to violence, with evidence of warfare in and around these southern cities, which suggests civil unrests, which may have very likely been the result of hardship and limited resources. Despite the fall of the classic Mayan settlements and their disappearance into the dense rainforests which grew up around them, the Mayan culture prospered until the arrival of the Spanish in a period referred to as the post-classic Mayan period, which will be the study of this particular episode. The decline of the classic Mayans may have been down to a number of factors, all of which are common when exploring typical circumstances for the decline of a culture throughout the world, particularly when there is no evidence of a catastrophic event such as a conquest by another culture or a natural disaster. If the classic Mayans were successful in their way of life, then their populations may have increased to a point where it outpaced the amount of resource, leading to a peak and subsequent competition, which can lead to tribal aggression. Such a breakdown in diplomatic relations can cause disruptions to trade and governance, and this will always have an adverse effect on society as a whole, as both the economy and the solidarity of the culture disintegrates. Over-farming due to an oversized population can lead to both deforestation and soil degradation, which can lead to an agricultural crisis. Whatever the exact situation, the culture continued to exist, but the culture took a journey from prosperity in the south to hardship and a revival in the north. If there was a significant migration of peoples from the southern lowlands to the Yucatan Peninsula, then the peoples would have had to adapt to a different environment. As much as the climate is believed to have been more stable in the north, it was generally more arid than in the south, where the rainforest prospered. Therefore, the Mayans had to rely on natural sinkholes called cenotes as a water source, alongside other water management techniques. In lands without major rivers or lakes, these cenotes were incredibly important. In fact, these cenotes would develop a spiritual significance to the Mayans. We can see offerings deposited in these cenotes, seemingly to encourage the gods into supplying a healthy amount of water to the Mayans, and this could have been particularly relevant in the minds of the Mayans if they had suffered at the hands of drought previously. The recovery of skeletons from one of these cenotes suggests a likelihood of human sacrifice taking place. Such may have been the keenness, or indeed desperation, for water.
The sacred cenote.
At the famous archaeological site of Chichen Itza, several cenotes exist, including the most famous of them all, referred to as the sacred cenote. The sacred cenote was created by the collapse of bedrock, exposing the groundwater. Individuals would have had to have descended to the groundwater with great care, but the content of the water source would be valuable and vital to the society living around it. Chichen Itza was ultimately abandoned during the 13th century, and it would take until the 20th century before the cenote would be dredged by archaeologists, and the contents would be discovered and investigated, leading to a wealth of artifacts and information. The abundance of artifacts recovered from the sacred cenote has led historians to believe that this was a place of offering and sacrifice. The recipient of these sacrifices was the rain god Chak. The aridity of the Yucatan Peninsula in comparison to the southern rainforests meant that Chak's blessings, and indeed rainfall, were more precious than ever. One of the most precious materials to the post-classic Mayans was jade, and the large amount of jade recovered from the sacred cenote demonstrates how important it was for the Mayans to offer something of great value to Chak. Some of the different styles of artwork on the jade plaques suggest that the plaques are likely to have been created in a range of locations, pointing towards a healthy trade network. This evidence of a wide trade network is further supported by the gold artifacts recovered from the sacred cenote. The post-classic Mayans, when compared to other pre-Columbian societies of the Americas, are not well known for their gold working. So the gold recovered from the sacred cenote is of great interest because it suggests a story relating to the exchange and working of gold from the post-classic Mayan perspective. Golden objects that had been transported from as far away as the modern country of Panama were found at the sacred cenote of Chichen Itza. Also, some hammered and worked gold that appears to have been imported and then worked by the Mayans themselves was also recovered. Due to the nature of water and sediment, we have also been fortunate enough to recover Mayan objects made in more organic materials such as wood and textiles. Jewellery, weapons and ceremonial objects demonstrate a range of materials that could not have only been available in the local area, demonstrating the wide trade network which we have been claiming, and which has also been evidence in the artifacts of neighbouring cultures. Depictions show the same kind of fusion of real life and mythological imagery that can be seen in the many animistic and pagan societies of the ancient world. Copper and bronze, carved animal bones and shells and obsidian were also materials among the hoard of objects recovered from the sacred cenote. Rubber balls, often associated with ball game rituals of the Mesoamericans, were also recovered. Such was the diversity of the hoard of objects that we could spend an entire episode discussing them. Probably the most intriguing of all the objects recovered from the sacred cenote were the abundance of human remains. The bodies of men, women and children were discovered, and evidence of blunt trauma strongly suggests that mainly these people were murdered before likely being slung into the cenote. Human sacrifice is evident in many of the ancient Mesoamerican cultures, so it seems highly logical that the purpose of the murder would have likely been human sacrifice in order to appease or impress the gods. The diverse array and nature of the objects at the sacred cenote support the point of view that the sacred cenote was indeed a place of spiritual ritual, including offerings to the gods and sacrifices. The sacred cenote was originally dredged in the early 20th century, shortly after its rediscovery. The dredging was overseen by an American-born archaeologist called Edward Herbert Thompson, a man who devoted much time to the study of the Mayans. Upon his findings of human remains, Thompson assumed that the Mayans at Chichen Itza had a leaning towards the sacrifice of young females, and nobody had a valid reason to argue against that until recent DNA studies revealed that a lot of the recovered skeletons both in and around the area of the sacred cenote were in fact those of young boys, perhaps sacrificed in pairs, as a nod to the story of the twin boys sacrificed to the gods in the sacred book called the Popol Vuh. Those of you who have listened to the podcast's episodes on the classic period Mayans from the Classical World volume may recall that we mentioned the hero twins from the Popol Vuh during that episode. There is indeed evidence of twin sacrifice at the sacred cenote, something that the very same recent DNA studies were able to confirm.
Chichen Itza.
Despite its own heyday being after the classic Mayan period, the city of Chichen Itza is probably the most iconic Mayan city for the global population. Its name is thought to mean at the mouth of the well of the enchanted rivers, with the Itza peoples being an ethnic group of the Mayans, possibly named in regard to their relationship with the enchanted waters of the cenotes. It seems to have emerged before the post-classic period, but did not flourish to become the important centre that it eventually became until after the Classic Mayan period and the apparent northward migration of the Mayans in the aftermath of the collapse of the southern lowland cities. In fact, despite the label Postclassic Mayans coming across as somewhat anticlimactic, the city of Chichen Itza represents the culmination of the technological and cultural progress of the Mayans over their many centuries of existence. The building in Chichen Itza, called El Castillo, is around 100 feet in height and is a step pyramid made from limestone. It is also referred to as the Temple of Kukulkan, with Kukulkan being the feathered serpent deity of Mayan mythology. Now, this is not the first feathered serpent deity that we have encountered in our Mesoamerican episodes. Only just in the previous episode regarding the Toltecs, a contemporary culture from central Mexico, we discovered the feathered serpent deity called Quetzalcoatl, who was held in high regard by all of the major societies of central Mexico all the way through to the Aztecs. Despite their similarities, there were differences between Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl for this very reason, that they were revered by different cultures. It is highly likely that both cultures would have been influenced by the much earlier Olmecs, so it is reasonable to suppose that both feathered serpent deities originated from an earlier Olmec concept. One of the more well-known features of the Temple of Kukulkan, or El Castillo, is the visual wonder that occurs both at the vernal and autumnal equinoxes, where the shadow of the sun creates the illusion of a serpent slithering diagonally down the side of the pyramid, where it results in a stone construction of a serpent's head. For this phenomenon to happen, the Mayans who constructed the pyramid would have had to have had a good astronomical understanding and great architectural skill. The four sides of the pyramid each have 91 steps, so in total there are 364 steps. These represent each of the 364 days of the year, and the temple on top represents the last remaining day. There are a number of non-invasive technologies that can establish more about the internal structure of ancient constructions, and we have come across this before when discussing the ancient Egyptian pyramids. Using such laser and radar technology, scientists were able to discover a void within the Great Pyramid of Giza, possibly thought to exist to provide stability to the structure. When such technology was used on El Castillo, it appeared that there were smaller buildings inside the structure and a cenote in the floor. This suggests that the positioning of El Castillo was not random or according to a city plan, but that it was built at a place which was regarded as a sacred ground by the Mayans. It is possible that smaller and older pyramids existed at the sites, and the Mayans would simply encase the smaller pyramid within a larger and newer construction until it reached its current form. Consistently, when discussing Mesoamerican societies, we have mentioned the large number of ball game courts that have been discovered or excavated. At Chichen Itza, we can see the largest of all the Mesoamerican ball game courts ever discovered. The Mesoamerican ball game essentially seems to require the players to be able to project a rubber ball through a hoop on a wall by using a part of their body. It is thought that the losing players may have been sacrificed, so the stakes could not have been any higher. The claim of the loser's fate is something that has been interpreted from depictions on the court's walls. The ball court at Chichen Itza has been measured at approximately 70 metres wide and almost 170 metres in length. The ball game court is believed to have been of great spiritual significance to the Mayans, as it would have been for all of the Mesoamerican societies. A short walk south from the area of El Castillo and the ball game court would bring you to a building called El Caracol, which would have been used as an observatory. The spiral staircase inside the building resembles the shell of a snail, and the Spanish word for the snail has been borrowed to give the name to this building. The spiral staircase leads upwards to a viewing tower. Constructions of Chichen Itza show a clear regard for astronomy, and the circular building overlooking a relatively flat landscape would have given the Mayans a very good view of the entire sky. Its construction is believed to have been planned with great care and with great regard for the heavenly bodies that it was being used to observe, with the dimensions and directions of the windows built with particular purpose to view particular celestial objects well. Close to El Castillo is another temple called the Warrior's Temple, which stands alongside numerous stone columns, which purely for convenience and grandeur has been called the 1,000 Columns, despite there being significantly less than 1,000 columns. What is particularly interesting about the Warrior's Temple is the sculpted representation of a chalk mule before the entrance, and we spoke about chalk mule sculptures during our episode on the Toltecs. The chalk mule is a figure which sits in a reclined position with its head facing sideways and its hands holding a bowl on its stomach. These chalk mule sculptures and figurines are abundant in the lands believed to be under the direct influence of the Toltecs, and this is just another example of Toltec influence in Mayan lands, especially within architecture. The Toltec influence on the post-classic Mayans is discussed and debated by historians. The columns and the chalk mule sculptures at the location on and around the Warrior's Temple point firmly towards a Toltec influence. There is also a large amount of warrior imagery at post-classic Mayan sites, which appeared to be a hallmark of the Toltec culture. However, we have to be very careful when comparing post-classic Mayan sites to Toltec sites, because although there are many similarities, a lot of them will be due to a general influence over all Mesoamerican sites. For example, the existence of a ball game court at Chichen Itza is not an indication of Toltec influence over Mayan culture, or indeed Mayan influence over Toltec culture, but it is actually just an aspect that influences all Mesoamerican cultures from a much earlier point in time. So when we look at the presence of a feathered serpent deity as depicted at Mayan sites such as El Castillo, it is tempting to instantly claim that this originates from the central Mexican cultures of Teotihuacan and then in turn the Toltecs and their own feathered serpent deity Quetzalcoatl, when in actual fact the feathered serpent deity did exist in classic Mayan pantheon. A better observation should be in the basic architectural styles of the post-classic Mayans, becoming more like the Toltec style since the Mayan migration northwards after the fall of the classic Mayan cities in the southern lowlands. Toltec influence over post-classic Mayan architecture and possibly post-classic Mayan culture likely existed, but you have to be careful to take a large overview of pre-Columbian Mesoamerican cultures in general before jumping to conclusions.
Government.
The influence of post-classic Maya stretched over a large area of the Yucatan Peninsula and a number of settlements, of which Chichen Itza was only one. Historians have noted that the governance of post-classic Maya was much more decentralized than it was during the classic Mayan period, and this could explain why Toltec influence was able to penetrate the post-classic Mayan settlements. There is no doubt that by migrating northwards after the fall of classic Maya, that the Mayans would have had to adapt to their new environment in a number of ways, including the political nature of the new lands. The post-classic Mayans seem to have created a coalition of independent city-states that thrived under a system of trade and commerce, and this would explain why so much Toltec influence could have been within the post-classic Mayan system. It is possible that some of the city-states under post-classic Mayan influence were ruled by an independent leader, which were known as Halach Unique by the Mayans, and that independent leader was ethnically a Toltec. Often we see that in such a hegemonic network of city-states that city-states can rebel or secede from the confederation, especially if they are on the fringes of the area of influence, and it is likely to be the same in the case of the post-classic Mayans. The fact that Toltecs were much more warlike in their nature than the classic Mayans meant that the Mayans may well have had to adapt to an area which was much more volatile in the nature of the relationship between different societies, and therefore there were warrior elites ruling over the Mayan cities and maybe utilising a council of elites, which is in contrast to the classic Mayan period where the rulers resembled god kings who ruled in a more absolute fashion. The transition was not sudden and instant, as we have to remember that the post-classic Mayan period existed from the fall of the classic Mayan cities in the 9th and 10th centuries to the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century. So these are many centuries of political adjustment and gradual adaptation to circumstances. So when we talk about a change of governance of the area under Mayan influence, we have to remember that this is a very general observation of a change over a large area and over a long period of time. Each independent city-state would likely have had a somewhat unique method of government and a unique relationship with the central Mayan state.
Timeline.
Chichen Itza was the major city for the Mayans in the early stages of the post-classic period, but it wasn't the only major urban centre. Another significant early settlement called Uxmal flourished further west in the Yucatan Peninsula. Both Chichen Itza and Uxmal had been established during the classic Mayan period, but only really prospered in the aftermath. Uxmal is a place where a style of late classic Mayan architecture known as Puuc architecture can be observed. The name Puuc actually references this specific region of the Yucatan Peninsula. Some of the patterns carved onto the buildings in Uxmal depict the rain god Chark, who was the main god honoured at the sacred cenote at Chichen Itza. It is difficult to identify the exact sequence of events, but there did appear to be a decline with the cities in the Puuc region towards the end of what is labelled the early post-classic period of Mayan history, so we are referencing the 10th century onwards. During this initial decline, Chichen Itza maintained its importance as the Mayan capital city. It is noted that Toltec influence on the architecture of Chichen Itza seemed to emerge during this period, but it is difficult to know how much Toltec influence there was in the decline of the Puk cities. We also know that the Toltec capital city of Tolan declined to abandonment during the 12th century, and it was also towards the end of the 12th century that Chichen Itza declined. So there is likely to be a lot of speculation about warfare, crop failures and trade dysfunction, leading to a general lull period in Mesoamerican history. Even though the Toltecs seemed to disappear, the Mayans did not, as new city-states emerged in the place of those that had collapsed. One of the cities which became quite powerful over the turn of the 13th century was Mayapan, situated around 50 miles west of Chichen Itza. Sources can work in contrast with each other when trying to explain the exact sequence of events that led to Mayapan supplanting Chichen Itza as the primary Mayan city. The Book of Chilam Balam of Chumayel, compiled in the 17th and 18th centuries, state that Mayapan conquered Chichen Itza. But some historians believe that the archaeological dates at both sites are not convincing in validating that story. Of course, it is possible that Mayapan and Chichen Itza were in conflict with each other without there being a profound consequence to the future of either city. The rise of the city of Mayapan is considered to be the late post-classic period. Mayapan attempted to assemble a coalition of cities under its hegemony, but historians have noted that this was a period of tension between Mayan cities. At its peak, Mayapan was ruled by a dynasty called the Kokom dynasty, who was founded by a man called Unak Seal, who it is claimed conquered Chichen Itza. It is said that during the dominance of Chichen Itza that Unak Seal threw himself into the sacred cenote, and because he survived, he gained a following that allowed him to rebel against the rulers at Chichen Itza and defeat them, allowing him to establish the new ruling Kokom dynasty of Mayapan. The dominance of Mayapan seemed to be at a time of increased warfare. This can be observed when looking at the archaeological site of Tulum, a resort that overlooks the Caribbean Sea from the Yucatan Peninsula. The Mayans called this place Zama, and it was a city that was surrounded by some serious defences, the type only constructed due to a likelihood of an aggressive attack. The walls were up to 16 feet tall, and in some cases up to 26 feet wide. Although it existed from the 6th century, it flourished as an important trade port in the later years of the Mayans up to the arrival of the Spanish. It may have been the intense competition which led to the fragmentation of the Mayapan Confederacy. The Kokom dynasty, the ruling dynasty of Mayapan, was overthrown by the aristocratic Xiu family, but the Xiu family ultimately faced rebellion which led to the fall and abandonment of the city during the 15th century. The Mayan culture still persisted though, because it did not need a major urban centre like Chichen Itza or Mayapan in order to continue. The independent city-states themselves continued onwards, taking the Mayan culture forwards with it, including to the south of the Yucatan Peninsula in the lands of the modern country of Guatemala, the country which saw the flourishing of the Classic Mayans. It was in the early 16th century that the Spanish arrived. By this time, the Mayans were not comparatively centralised, with many independent Mayan city-states operating either in isolation from one another or in small localised unions. The Spanish arrived on the coasts of Central America by chance, and were curious about the new landmass and its worth. Undoubtedly, the Mayans would have been curious themselves about these foreign arrivals with all of their unfamiliar technology and equipment, but they would have also been highly apprehensive. Spanish presence in Mayan lands may not have initially been aggressive, and the Spanish would have had to navigate and negotiate with each Mayan polity as they met and encountered each of them. It is very likely that each encounter would have been different, with some being more cordial than others. It was likely inevitable that the Spanish explorers would have individually assessed their chances of capturing the wealth of the Mayan territories and would have also wanted to be in front of their nearest explorer rivals. If one explorer did not make a quick move to gather the wealth of the Mayans, then the next explorer would. Therefore, the pressure was on for each explorer to make their move on the Mayans, whether that be through diplomacy, negotiation or trade, or by aggression and plunder. Mayan resolve against Spanish oppression would have been hurt by a factor that neither side may have considered or prepared for. The Spanish had developed their own immunity to diseases such as influenza, measles and smallpox, whereas for the Mayans, these diseases were unfamiliar, and the presence of these diseases caused a significant decline in the Mayan population. Even though the Mayan Confederacy had been replaced by much more localized and small city-states, the necessity for trade was still important, and the diseases would have been unknowingly carried along the well-used trade routes. So when the Spanish did decide that they wanted to attack the Mayans, not only were the Mayans subject to the advanced Spanish technology, but the Mayans were significantly weakened by Spanish diseases. This did not prevent the Mayans from fiercely defending their respective positions, and when the Spanish did turn their attempts to contact to attempts to conquest from the 1520s, they met with strong resistance that caused the conquests to be drawn out and bloody. The Mayans knew their territory and terrain and went into hiding, attacking the Spanish using guerrilla tactics. This would only serve to delay the inevitable though, as the Spanish spent the middle decades of the 16th century gradually subjugating the Mayan city-states and gaining control of the Yucatan Peninsula. Mayan codices were burned by a Spanish bishop called Diego de Landa in the year 1562, causing irreparable damage to the Mayan cultural heritage and forcing Christian conversion on the Mayans themselves. Many captured Mayans were subjected to forced labour by their Spanish captors. The final Maya kingdom to resist Spanish rule was the Itza Maya of Tayasal, situated near the banks of the Lake Chichen Itza in the modern country of Guatemala. The modern town of Flores was the location of the ancient capital city of Nochpeten, which held on to its independence until the final years of the 17th century, around 180 years after the first Spanish contact with the Mayans. This is a testament to the resilience of the Mayan bloodlines.
And we're live from the living room as Doug eyes up the matchday spread. He's reaching for the buffalo wing. Perfect! Hang on, what's this? Oh, he's gone for a can of Pepsi too! Incredible! What a finish! Sensational combination! Look at the delight on his face. There's no doubt about it. It just tastes better. Match days deserve Pepsi. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a pack of Pepsi Zero Sugar for today's match. It's poetry in motion.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
A big warm thank you for listening to this week's episode on the Postclassic Mayans. Now, if you enjoy the podcast and you'd like to support the podcast, then please visit our website, historyoftheworldpodcast.com, click on the Patreon link and sign up to make a monthly contribution. You will become a lifelong member of the History of the World podcast Illuminati, and you'll qualify for gifts and rewards. You can follow the podcast on social media. That's on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Tumblr, Threads and Mastodon. And I'm always very keen to hear about your feedback, so I do encourage you please to drop me a line at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com, and your feedback will be discussed during our History of the World podcast debrief episodes. Next time we'll be talking about the Aztecs and wrapping up our pre-Columbian Mesoamerican series. So I'll look forward to seeing you then. But until then, don't forget, be good.
The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler. Please consider making a financial contribution by going to the historyoftheworldpodcast.com website and clicking on the Patreon link. Email the show at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. And don't forget to join our social media at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Tumblr. See you next time.